Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Native Live Insights from the Radar, where um, Liam from Slash Data and myself are going to be going over some of the fun things from the radar that was published at KubeCon North America last year, which covered sort of batch AI, ML, and then multi-cluster management type stuff. So, Liam, why don't you go ahead and kick it off with an intro?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I'm Liam. I'm from Slash Data. So for context for the rest of what we see, I think it's useful to explain where these numbers come from and who we spoke to about these things. So in Q3 of last year, we spoke to more than 300 professional developers who use some sort of cloud native technologies in their workflow. And then we asked them about their perceptions and their thoughts regarding, as Bob just said, AI and ML batch computing technologies, as well as multi-cluster application management technologies. These developers are from around the world with lots of different focuses. We asked them basically what they thought about maturity and usefulness of these products, which refers to like how maturity is how stable and reliable it is, and usefulness is like how well it fits to their like project requirements. And then we also asked them how likely they are to recommend the technology to other people, especially other developers. And then from this and using the useful and how the usage rate of these technologies, we developed these tech radars, which have four categories, which is adopt, trial, assess, and hold. Adopt technologies were considered to be reliable choices for most cases. Trial technologies are worth exploring to see if they meet your needs. And assess technologies maybe require more careful evaluation, and hold technologies are considered either less mature or less useful in their current state. So I think that's a good background. Also, you'll see on many of the radars, we use the GSI, so Graduated Incubating Sandbox, that CNCF use for the kind of readiness and maturity of technologies for CNCF's own, CNCF's own metric for how these technologies are progressing. Bob can also clarify this if we have further questions.
Actually, quick little thing. So I mentioned the link for the event, pointing to another one. I have poked a few people about that, but I don't know if it will get resolved. Thank you for bringing it up, though.
Yeah, I think someone also left the correct link in that chat, so hopefully
Okay, cool.
People are migrating across. But yeah, with that, I think we can start with multi-cluster application management, or MCM as we call it, for most of the time, with this tech radar. So the kind of big takeaway is that Argo CD and Cilium, I hope it's Cilium and not Kilium, Cilium were put in the adopt section, so technologies viewed as the most mature, with Armada and Backstage in the trial section. Any comments, Bob, on this so far?
Yeah, both have been sort of like proven technologies used by a large set of people for many years. Even going back to, I think, 2016, 2017, when I was at the University of Michigan, we were, a very early adopter of Cilium, and it's been pretty solid since then. One of the things I do sort of want to mention on some of this stuff, like Armada being a sandbox project in the trial area, and this sort of touches on the sandbox incubating graduate thing you had mentioned earlier. Projects can be technology, sort of like potentially at a much greater level in terms of like completeness, and still be at like sandbox or incubating, but there might be other aspects, like they don't have governance that could make it easier or they don't necessarily have good like vendor diversity in terms of contributors and things like that kind of potentially prevent them from becoming graduated, that kind of point where people really know that they can rely on them.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's to add on that top is that the power and the power of how we do this research here is that it's based on the subjective perceptions of developers based on what they think is useful, what they think is mature, and they would recommend, which obviously has the issue of being subjective. Like maybe developers may be less concerned about governance because for them it's about usefulness, but at the other time gives us a much more powerful insight into like where developers see these technologies. So I think there's a useful kind of thing to remember, like Armada is only a sandbox, but developers seem to be quite fond of it. Therefore, like the kind of the difference that exists within these. we can follow up by looking at the kind of breakdown for how some of these technologies scored in terms of their usefulness, maturity, and their recommendation. So, like, I think a big one here with like Cilium and Argo, again, they're leading the way in terms of usefulness, which reflects the fact that in the adopt phase. But also, you can see that Cilium has like no negative reviews in terms of usefulness. No one thinks it's bad. Half the people who are familiar with it in our survey gave it a 5-star rating. So, like, it's clearly hitting the needs of developers that are using it, or at least familiar with it. And we can see the same when we can move to the maturity. So this is again a rating on a 5-star scale. Again, Cilium takes half the developers think it's a 5-star maturity. Like as Bob just mentioned, it's been in usage for a long time. Probably a lot of people who are very familiar with it are probably very happy with it, especially if they've been using it for so long. But I think one of the interesting things we see here is how like the rankings can show like strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, Armada, which you mentioned earlier, comes second place here. Like, it has a really high rating and not that many negative ratings. While Argo CD, which was one of the higher ones, does less well, performs but less well here, but still has quite strong rating. You see that like 79% of people gave it a 4 or 5 stars. So there's still a lot of positivity for it, but just it can vary between metrics we measure on.
Yeah, so like piggybacking off that is Armada could be very like the people find it very useful. It's very stable, but it just hasn't spent enough time sort of going through the processes to be considered a graduated project yet.
Yeah, and as when we go back just quickly to them, this is the usefulness again. So we've gone back a slide. Again, you see Armada. I think it's a good example to explain how this works. It's bang in the middle for usefulness, which means that like you can see here, like people find it stable, reliable. Maybe it doesn't match all their needs, and this is how we kind of end up with the radar as it looks at the end point. And the last section we ask about is for each technology, we ask them how likely they are to recommend it. And I think there's one really big caveat, which I'm pretty sure all the developers in the audience will understand, which is that developers who are using a technology are quite likely to recommend other people also would use that technology. Like we see for every single technology, more than 50% of people would recommend it someone else using it, even if it's only a likely recommend rather than very likely. And I think that's a sign that if you're using a technology and you're getting some usage of it, i.e. because you're using it, you're more likely to have at least the kind of baseline favorable views compared to kind of overwhelming negative views. We do see some technologies which do have like higher negative, but we're still looking in the range of like 9-10%. I think the lowest is Istio, which I think is about 9% of people wouldn't recommend it who are familiar with it, which is still like a very small minority of people.
And I can like a lot of those opinions can also be from prior experiences where they have used it. Like I know Istio previously, like you used to have to deal with like a megabyte of YAML to configure it, but they've made a lot of improvements since then. And some people still have, I'll say, some biases and perception around that.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to consider like one of the benefit. Obviously, the major benefit to developers is to look at the technologies and see what's out there and what people think is useful. But obviously, for those who are also working in like kind of developing these and featuring these, like because it's a subjective scale, like if you had a negative reaction to it or negative experience with it, you'll then, as the people like supporting this, are going to have to overcome the fact there's a percentage of people that have possibly more negative views for whatever reason they may have them. And the last section is just kind of clarify and kind of show how these all work together. So for quick context, the x-axis in this doesn't mean anything. It's just so you can see them as separate points rather than them all overlapping on top of each other. And the color scale represents the adopt through to hold scale. And the purpose of this is to kind of show how you kind of high performance across various sectors or multiple sectors is important to kind of being considered for the adopt position, but how you can fail in one and still do okay overall. But what you'll generally see is that the red technologies which fall into hold are towards the bottom for most features. The orange and green are kind of lower to middle higher, and then the Cilium and Argo CD are kind of high for all but like one case for both of them, which kind of shows how you have to be kind of doing well overall at all the features we care about to get an understanding of being in the adopt position. But I think also the last thing with the recommendation is you can see occasionally there's technologies that aren't doing very well at anything else, but are doing well in recommendation. So the one we highlighted in the image is Meshery. which is kind of towards the bottom for usage, maturity, and usefulness, but like kind of in the middle for recommendation, which always kind of says to us is that there's some other factor, some other feature that's very hard to capture, some kind of hidden variable we would call it, that the recommendation allows us to kind of see past any places where there might be kind of not capturing everything that we can see.
Like a good example is, it might be very good at an explicit like niche case, and in which case, you know, overall it might be less in terms of usefulness or usage, but highly recommended for that specific thing.
And then, not to give anything away, but spoiler, we've done this again for this kind of research for a different set of technologies that'll be out very soon. And you've seen again where there's technologies that aren't doing great on many features, but everyone's like the vast majority of users say to recommend it. And like if you're familiar, you'll kind of understand where these technologies sometimes get additional like boosts in recommendation. If anyone has any questions, obviously about what we've covered so far, they're more than welcome to throw it in the chat. Me and Bob are happy to answer anything. And we're also happy to go back to previous slides if people have questions about anything specific.
Something.
But,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you carry on.
Yeah, something else I was going to say. We kind of skipped right in over this and went right into the details. But one of the reasons why we selected these two categories in terms of multi-cluster management and the next one being AI, ML, and batch is because AML batch is pretty self-evident with the popularity that it is right now. But on the multi-cluster side there is a very large interest in going to multi-cluster, multi-cloud, and hybrid deployments for a variety of reasons. Probably the big one these days actually being cost management and people looking to potentially shift resources between clouds. And then when we looked at multi-cluster management, we sort of saw it as two different categories, and multi-cluster application management and then like multi-cluster infrastructure management. So this radar covered much more on the application level where it's less about how are you managing clusters across multiple clouds and more about the applications and things like that on top of it, and how you link those applications and services together. That's why like the service meshes are in there.
Yeah. I didn't mention at the beginning, but the technologies obviously, so they're both the topics mentioned, so MCM and batch AI ML, and the technologies, they come from CNCF with the technology groups that I think suggest these the technologies as well. So that's where they come from in case people are curious about like how we selected the ones that we selected as well. So moving back through to follow up with so the batch AI ML compute, obviously Bob just mentioned why this is important. I think everyone watching is also probably aware of why this is
very tired of it, hearing about
it. Yeah, so the first thing you want to notice before anything else, there's a lot more technologies on this radar than there was on the previous one. Bob kind of explained why with the focus on MCM application side of it rather than anything else. Also, obviously, this is a big topic. There's a lot of interest, a lot of technologies of focus. So for this one, kubefs, Apache Airflow, Kubeflow, and Fluid were the ones that emerged into the adopt position. With Kserve, Armada, Bento ML, MLflow, KubeArray, Apache Unicorn, DidShim in the trial area.
Yeah. One other thing, just as a general thing, we also included some other projects from like the LFAI Foundation and other ones in this specifically because there is we try to get a better sampling of what people are actually running. So you can see like Jupyter Hub on there, it's missing the like I or S associated with it. That's just an external project that many people are using.
Yeah. And you also see that when we showed the usage in the end of this section, you'll see like why it was relevant to include like Jupyter Hub, for example.
Yeah.
Moving to the usefulness, obviously, again, because there's more technologies, the graph is a bit more busier. So there is a hard copy of this available from CNCF. So you can obviously spend time looking through this. But again, we see that the technologies that were rose to the top, again, appear at the top of usefulness, especially Apache Airflow, which has something like 86% of people gave it a 4 or 5 star in terms of usefulness. And I think for people familiar with the space will also kind of understand kind of where that comes from and like kind of an agreement with that. The ones that was an interesting one in this one though was MLflow, which as you can still see has a very high like 4 or 5 star rating. But there was a much smaller percentage of 5 star and like a much slightly higher percentage of 1 and 2 star, which again was kind of highlighting the importance of using this kind of 5-point scale, which is that even though 4 and 5 is a recommendation, it's kind of a good score. There is a subtle distinction that exists between the 5 and 4 star and the benefit of looking at that front. And like another example just above it is CubeDL, where you can see that it's of its positive 4 and 5 star reviews, most of them are 5 stars, which to me as an analyst looking at it is like, well, there's clearly doing something right for a chunk of people, and a whole chunk of people are kind of less impressed, or it's just not perfectly fitting to their usability.
Yeah, that's like the previous one I'm talking about, where it fits more of that specific use case and fills that need very well, versus being like a general tool for everything.
Yeah, which is also why we recommend like when you consider these tools to like this is also a benefit, because for example, like maybe you are in that 40% that it is a perfect match for. So maybe for you this is the perfect tool that you could use, while for others maybe less so. And when we look at maturity, we kind of see a similar pattern emerge with Airflow having like an overwhelming 4 and 5 star position, but we're also one of the higher 2 stars, which is kind of a confusing thing in terms of maturity. But I assume, like, again, it's based on people's experience with it. And obviously, Apache Airflow has the unrivaled position of being the most used of these tools in our survey. So in terms of the usage statistics, had the highest rated to people who either used it a lot or been using it for a while or familiar with it, which means that increased the chance of people who are less happy with it, of whatever reason.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The other thing with Airflow, like it is predominantly like many of the deployments with it are in terms of on top of cloud and things like that. But it does support, executors and all that on various other platforms. So that's another thing where, some people's previous bias or, environment can potentially creep in.
I think there's also an interesting observation when we go back to the usefulness and you look at the kind of negative reviews that exist. There's a slightly higher percentage of less happy reviews in terms of maturity, which I think is a reflection among many things, but also the fact that this is like a very exciting space and a lot of people are involved in it, with lots of interest in it, and also it's a growing space, which means that any deviation from perfect reliability and stability is going to upset people, especially with the requirement of batch to handle large amounts of data. Like anything that stops that happening when that is the kind of crunch you're under is going to obviously, I think, have more negativity than it not being perfectly suited for your exact specifications.
I can also speak from personal experience with a lot of the data engineers and system engineers that come from the HPC batch side. They tend to be a bit more particular about things as well.
Yeah, but despite their like particularities or quirks, like again, a high recommendation across the board for basically every technology that's used.
Yeah,
even technologies that had quite low, high like negative ratings on various aspects. Like I think Spiderpool was a good example of like more 1 and 2 star reviews than others. It still sits at like a 68 net promoter score, so 68% more than for highly likely and likely than highly unlikely or unlikely. So like again, we're capturing some kind of hidden variables of like what people like about it for various reasons. But Unicorn and Airflow have vast dominance in terms of recommendations, looking at like 89% and 88% of recommendation of to use these tools. So despite whatever specifications that these developers need, like they still have a lot of support behind other people using the technologies that they're using. I can't hear Bob. Am I alone?
Oh, sorry. I hit my physical mute button. Going back to Spiderpool for a second, in terms of its, use cases in adoption there. Like, it is a very specific technology. It's for basically a under limit for providing like RDMA services between uh, pods. Um, and the amount of people that are actually doing RDMA in this space is not a huge amount. But as someone that has tried to do this previously, having something that automates a lot of this makes it dramatically easier. uh,
Yeah, like I think that's also when considering these like how these ratings work, as Bob said, with the if a tool does something, technology does something that's quite specific, then obviously that's going to change how its usefulness and maturity are considered by the developers who are using it. Like it can work both ways. Again, like as I said, like this does a very specific thing. If it does that specific thing to developers who want to do that specific thing, then maybe they'll be really highly rewarding of like this is very useful. But at the same time, any deviations from stability or reliability, they'll penalize it even more because like it's the one thing that does the thing they want to do. And if it's not doing it, then that's to them like going to give them negative views. So obviously we can't induce exactly what each developer thinks, but we can you can kind of understand like how things can emerge as results from this.
yeah.
And just to close, just to show the again the kind of comparison across all four aspects, as I mentioned, Apache Airflow kind of breaks the scale in terms of the usage statistics. It has such a higher popularity than anything else that we asked about that it kind of the rest of them all scatter to the bottom, and it also has high maturity, high usefulness, and then highly recommended. In terms of what Bob was mentioned at the beginning with Jupyter Hub, like one of the technologies outside of CNCF's, like kind of the landscape technologies that we have the graduated sandbox incubating, you can see that it's the second highest use technology on this list. It has the highest second use statistics, which is why it's important for us to consider it, even if it doesn't do well on maturity or usefulness, like from our developers' perspective. It's useful to make sure we're including it and aware of it. But as it pointed out with previous ones, even though it didn't do particularly well on maturity or usefulness, people are still recommending it. Again, existing that the tools you use, people have lots of recommendations for. The next slide is the kind of the key insights. Is there anything else you want to add or kind of mention from the report? Now's the time, Bob, as well.
Not so much from the report itself. We did also like ask people questions about certain gaps and things like that, which we can also cover in this a bit more. But going back to sort of like exploring this data and looking at it and some of the details that Liam you have really dived into, is a lot of this information can help you sort of be able to look at the data and actually take meaningful answers from it that will apply to your situation with these things. And as we're going to be, as the CNCF is going to be producing more radars, having this understanding will help you very much in the future as well.
Yeah. And obviously, I think there is a report about the gaps the developers were asked about. The basic developers are asked like where they think there are kind of gaps in the cloud native ecosystem, especially particularly, I think standards, people mention a lot of standards, but like as one would expect, security was the number one thing. People always mention security. I think every developer who works in the space is aware that the need for either security standards or security they can rely on. I think the reality is people just don't want to think about security, and anything that can minimize the fact they have to think about security is a big one. The second one, which also would do, so no, sorry to make it the next radar that's coming soon, but one of the things we were like interested in understanding more as we go forward is when people discuss challenges with cloud-native technologies, the challenge is to understand whether the challenge relates to the technology itself or people's familiarity with being a cloud-native developer. I imagine those who are attending this webinar are probably the people who are most well informed about cloud-native development by the fact that they're here. Maybe I'm just being polite or preaching to the choir. But other people, like this may be like not their main duty. Their main job may be to do something else. Like if you're a data scientist who has become a data engineer because that's the size of the company you're in, you may not particularly care about how exactly a batch AML works. That may not be your focus. You want it to work. And if you're having challenges with it, that can be separate to the fact that the tool is well built. So like we are digging into it more. We're looking into what we're calling cloud native explorers, so people who are like very keen about technologies, that they play with them, they explore them, kind of seeing what they think of other and comparing it to other developers to kind of see where the gaps might be in this, the system overall.
Yeah. Actually, going back to the data engineer type thing and potentially having to do more for your role, and this bleeds over with multi-cluster management, um, with being one of the big things companies are looking to do is burst out to various cloud providers and such. Like Ricardo Roca did a uh, keynote demo where they were trying to, I think it was reprocess uh, all information that first found the like Higgs boson, and it's something that took a long time on their data center, but they were able to batch or like scale out to at the time it was like Google, and because they were able to horizontally scale that up significantly, it literally completed in like 2 minutes. So there's been a lot of like trade-off conversations happening between like, okay, should we let this run locally for a longer period of time, or should we burst it out to a cloud provider and consume a whole bunch of resources and get it done in like 10 minutes?
Hmm.
And that's really changed the way a lot of researchers have been sort of like it's changed their workflows and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a tangent, but just kind of an interesting trend that has been happening.
I think also when one of the things we're looking at when we asked a text question basically to ask people like what they think the gaps are. Like I think a few comments you saw people who were not using multi-cluster management but had indicated that their organization is interested in using more, which I think for multi-cluster management was a major position that everyone was interested in doing more of this or likely to invest more energy and time into it. I think a lot of people want to do it, but don't know where to start with it. A lot of like this just feels like a very complicated topic to them, and like I think this was one of the importance of using it here was alongside getting people's opinions on it so we can understand the space better.
Yep.
I think a lot of people were exposed to this long list of technologies for the first time, which was obviously a benefit to them participating as they got to see what the scale of the multi-cluster application management space looks like
Yep.
for their technologies. So.
And specifically going in that and covering some of the gaps, there was definitely like a relation of people bring up security and things like that. But when you are now having to manage multiple cloud providers, um, it's like Amazon has their entire thing for uh, locking down their stuff and security and permissions. That's different from Google. That's different from Azure, and there isn't a good sort of policy engine in the space right now where you can sort of design for that and have it apply across all of them. So it adds a lot more complexity, and that is something that many groups are having to sort of deal with as they really approach multi-cluster.
And I think when we one of the things when we look at, so obviously CNCF has a definition of cloud native, and like we in the market research industry like kind of use it or adapt it for things. But I think one of the things we have to consider occasionally is that there are people who are like definitionally cloud native in how they approach their design, how they approach their architecture, and how they like code and deploy, but who are not particularly well informed about what the actually benefits of being cloud native are. Like they kind of have bits and pieces of it here and there. And as developers are now more involved in like kind of configuring and doing the infrastructure themselves and everything, that they're being exposed to places where there is just gaps in their knowledge that they have to overcome. And I think these radars act as a very useful place to just go and refer to as like a backstop of knowledge on what to be doing for these technologies.
Yeah, the one other pattern that we've kind of generally seen, and this sort of backs that up, is originally like the idea of cloud native and all that was kind of like trying to really collapse onto the developer, and being able to sort of have them manage much more. But because now of the complexity involved in the environment, we're kind of now seeing that sort of persona split back into the more specific roles of developer and sort of the cluster engineer or sysadmin type thing. And we kind of see that too with the rise in like platform engineering, where you have the developers that are working on the platform that the other team is spinning up and managing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think interest in platform tools is going to continue. So, as a hint for one of the next ones, we discuss an aspect of this in our next radar. So, yeah.
Yep. Well, we've kind of been talking for a bit. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. We can keep talking, but it might drift further and further from the purpose of the website.
Do you want to pop over to key insights? I don't remember if we covered everything on that slide.
Yeah, let's get back to them. So just for summary again, so the key insights, so for multi-cluster application management technologies, Argo, CD, and Cilium were in the adopt position. Cilium was also considered the most useful and the most mature technology from this group, while Argo was considered highly useful but ranked lower on maturity rankings. But was the MCM technology that received the highest proportion of developers who would recommend it, kind of indicating where these two came to the top from. For batch, Apache Airflow, kubefs, kubeflow, and Fluid were placed in the adopt position. And Airflow, kubefs, and kubeflow were the top three for usefulness and maturity. And Fluid ranked highly on maturity and was one of the technologies most likely to be recommended, to kind of explain where these came from. So the key takeaways for those who want to know the bare minimum that they could take away from this. Yeah, I mean, it's a question from Taylor.
Yeah. Are there any fun or unexpected findings you uncovered? Anything you saw, Liam?
So for me, it was the discussion we had earlier about the text responses was basically looking through some of the text responses of what the gaps are, and a kind of general kind of, you see it here and there, people who kind of really seem to be explaining that they're struggling with what they're doing. Like there was like Bob, you mentioned to me before, but there was a few comments people would say, and you're like, we have a solution for this. Like this exists. Like this is like a well-known problem. People have been dealing with this problem for at least a decade and have like, there are loads of solutions for it. But people were saying that I didn't have any place to do any, I didn't know how to do this at all, which I think was a kind of big marker of like, there is a lot of education still to do on like making sure people are fully utilizing the benefits of being cloud native and the technologies and the kind of capacity that you get from it.
Yeah. For me, I don't think there wasn't anything necessarily unexpected, but validating. Like, especially around the things with multi-cluster management, relating to complexity and bursting and things like that, and how that is becoming a much larger problem for the ecosystem as a whole, versus it being more of a niche thing previously.
Charles also made a comment about lots of thoughts about cloud bursting optimization in their head at the moment.
Yeah. I'll say like the other, like we're even shifting these days from potentially cost management to where are the GPUs? Which provider, which region has the GPUs, and how fast can I spin stuff up to consume them? So that has, I forget, there's been an AWS region that's really had like stock out issues of GPUs, and people have been shifting over to others to try and take advantage of them.
Yeah. And not to, this may be genuine, not just like a push towards like /data, but like we survey every 6 months like a lot of developers in lots of different areas, and I haven't looked into it myself, but I'm aware we have like regional differences for ML AI developers, so we have access to kind of that kind of data. And I myself now would be curious to look into like how different regions are approaching, like where they're deploying codes and how they're using GPUs, because of there's both embargoes and like restrictions on GPUs. There's also just the kind of outright economic difference in regions to be able to like buy huge amounts of GPUs to like do the kind of training. So I would now myself be curious to look in like to see how much training data, like what they're training it on, like kind of stuff exists within our data set. But Satak asked about what is cloud bursting. I think Bob's best to explain that.
Yeah. So cloud bursting in like frequent like hybrid deployments where you have a physical data center and you say you want to get something done, or your physical data center is at capacity and you want to move some of your workload to a cloud, and or if you're in a cloud, you potentially want to shift some of your workload to another region where it is cheaper for it to run. And if it becomes more expensive, then you sort of move it someplace else. And there's been a lot in terms of work done in that space for around like auto scaling, but that again goes back to adding a lot more complexity.
I think it's a thing we've discussed. I've discussed a lot talking about cloud deployment, is that it's very interesting that the modern like developer who deploys to the cloud, or at least is aware of what they're deploying to the cloud, is like much more aware of the financials of deployment than I think people were previously aware of, like how much a server or mainframe actually costs them to do the job. Like now that you can track the pennies of what you're doing, I think people are much more aware of like price sensitivity and price optimization than they have been in the past.
Yeah, it's a lot. You get also just a lot more data for that sort of thing, and so it makes it easier to do cost modeling and like where where you should potentially prioritize optimization in a like multi-component service.
And CNCF has a report coming soon, another report about the state of cloud native. And in it, we have a look at like where people are deploying. So we like mentioned like hybrid cloud is one of the options we look at. And you can see this trend that might be associated with what yourself and Charles is mentioning about the kind of benefits of the utility of bursting and why this might be directing people's choices and how they're choosing to deploy their code. So.
Anyone else have any other questions? Figure give it like another minute.
Yeah, I'll just show the population demographics before we call it, so people can see. We also give the context. This group here. Do you have my mouse? Excellent. This group here is what we are referring to. I was referring to earlier as cloud native explorers that will be doing more research with and on in the future reports. So yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then we can probably wrap this up. Liam, do you have a slide or anything you want to mention about potentially following up with Slash Data?
Yeah. So just for context, I'm from Slash Data. We are market researchers who kind of specialize on developers and technology space, custom research, and as well as intelligence and data access. So if you're interested in anything more specific, you can visit our website. We also have various free resources. They just require an email, and you get access to our free resources, which include various reports and also kind of things that are very useful to developers at the moment. So yeah, that's Slash Data. Yeah.
We did get like one last question that I will like try and answer really quick. How do you manage bursting? And that can be a bit more complicated, but some of the multi-cluster tools that were referenced earlier can help you with that, especially managing across like managing workloads across multiple cloud providers. Getting a bit more in depth on that would be a whole other conversation. But hopefully that that wraps it up.
So.
Huh?
I'd be twiddling my thumbs for most of that conversation as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Thank you again. If you want to follow up with Slashia, Liam mentioned the information. There's the slide, the CNCF side. I am known as Mr. Bobby Tables across all the things. Feel free to shoot me a DM or sort of follow up out of band. Thanks, everyone.